also good to see Bob Went here with us this morning. Good to see everyone. I am really sorry that Alice can't be here this morning because she and I have a running joke about developing patience as a this morning. And she mentioned last week when I visited with her that she was praying that the Holy Spirit would continue to give her patience to do all of her rehab work. And we're going to be praying for her and her grandson's accident, and so just keep her lifted. We're also praying for my husband this morning, as he was very nervous about accompanying the choir at church in peace, which is, if you know Walter, nervousness is not a characteristic trait of his. So I told him that the congregation would be in prayer. He wanted to know if I could take off today to play for him, and I said, no, I cannot. It's the only time he's like, I really miss you today. I could use you on the piano. But anyways, we pray for him and for all congregations that are worshiping on this beautiful morning. I am a history and documentary addict, and it would just so happen that this week I've been watching this series, and I can't even tell you what channel it's on. All I know it's 1470 on my cable system. And they've been doing a series on the Roman Empire. And as we all know, in the period of the New Testament, Paul himself, although a Jew, was actually a citizen of the Roman Empire, and Rome occupied what was really the northern tier of Africa, along the Mediterranean, most of Europe, and then that part of Asia that we call Asia Minor. And by controlling the Mediterranean Sea, they really controlled almost this little oval shaped group of nations. Rome was a tremendous military power. Their goal was to rule definitively, to conquer definitively, and then ensure that peace prevailed. But they believed in total domination, and only then did they believe that there could be peace. They also believed in enjoying the pleasures of life. There was a wonderful, which kind of run counter to what we think of as the fruits of the Spirit, or as Paul has identified all the fruits of the flesh. Those things were part of the Roman lifestyle, not only to Galatia, but in Corinth and all of the other cities and towns where Paul was preaching the gospel. He was preaching not necessarily to the Jews first, but also to the Gentiles. He's the first person, as we know, to really have a strong ministry to the Gentiles. One of the episodes of this documentary focused on the town of Pompeii. Pompeii, as you know, was destroyed by a volcano. And ironically, there are still literally forms of people that were sort of calcified, and they've been able to see even the expressions on people's faces as they ran and tried to find a cover from this horrific volcanic ash. A cup, silver cup, was one of the artifacts that was discovered, and on this cup were a couple of inscriptions. One was that the greatest treasure in life lies in pleasure. And on the other side of the cup was engraved, basically, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you may die. In other words, life is short, have a good time while you can. One of the things I've learned about the Roman Empire also is that they sort of had a community welfare system, so that if you were a citizen of Rome, you were ensured that you were going to get bread provided to you by the empire. What that meant was that no matter where you were on the socioeconomic scale in Rome, you were assured of having some kind of food to eat. And so it was an equalizer of sorts, but people who still were on the higher levels of society had the opportunity that since you weren't working for your sustenance, you could then spend your time working for profit. There are pictures that they found, and they're characterized by people who just seemed to be pretty calm. Imagine if the federal government promised every single citizen, right, enough food to eat, or a basic meal every day. No matter who you were, rich or poor, everybody got this basic sustenance of bread, a basic allocation of bread. And what you did beyond that was up to you. People, there were pictures of people actually vomiting at huge banquets. The idea was that you had so much food available to you that you would, almost like a bulimia, a person suffering from bulimia would do, you would sort of induce vomiting so that you had more room to eat more good food. This was not considered a disease or a dysfunction, but rather a hedonistic way to say, you need to do whatever you can do to enjoy more and more and more. There are mosaics in the floors of people's homes that depict half-eaten fishes, breadcrumbs, pieces of fruit or sprigs of fruit with maybe only a few grapes or berries left on it. This depicted the fact that as people ate, they just put their refuse on the floor, and someone came along afterward to sweep it up. The whole notion of the good life in the Roman Empire was, have as much as you want, do whatever you want, life is short, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you may die. Worship in the Roman temples included orgies. This was just part of what they did. Have wine, orgies in the temple, this was the way that you satisfied the gods. There were simply no limits to personal pleasure in the Roman Empire. So for Paul, a trained Pharisee, someone who's coming to deliver a message about Jesus Christ, this lowly Jewish carpenter who never had his own home, never had many possessions, talked to people who were considered the outcasts in their communities, someone who really wasn't about the exploitation of material resources or the exploitation of others for pleasure. Paul has to draw a pretty stark difference, not only between the desires of the flesh and the fruits of the Spirit, but to make a case as to why one or the other is better than the other. If you look at this interesting list of fruits of the flesh, fornication, impurity, licentiousness, idolatry, sorcery, enmities, strife, jealousy, anger, quarrels, dissensions, factions, envy, drunkenness, and carousing, and things like this. If you put all these actions into context, these are things that we do that are very self-centered. We argue or quarrel when we're more concerned about ourselves being right or when we personally feel that we've been offended. Fornication, impurity, licentiousness, those are things that are derived out of our need to either feel pleasure or our disregard for the feelings of other people. When we put ourselves at the center and we really don't care what happens to other people or the impact of our actions on other people, that's when we're actually giving in to what Paul calls the fruits of the flesh or the desires of the flesh. It's interesting that a lot of these have to do with sexual licentiousness, fornication. But envy, jealousy, strife, anger, quarrels, all of those things we entered into on a regular basis. I posted on our Facebook page, it's like we all want to do better at this stuff, right? We don't want to quarrel. We don't want to be jealous of other people. I've taken to actually confessing the sin of coveting other people's things when I see someone who has a handbag that I really like or shoes that I really like. Just to make myself mindful of the fact that if I let that particular desire get too out of hand, it can turn into jealousy and it can turn into something that's not really healthy. What's wrong with telling someone else that they look great? What's wrong with admiring things that other people have that you don't have? You can find a great deal of joy in just allowing yourself to compliment and be excited for someone else. When we're very self-centered, those same feelings can turn into jealousy and envy and strife. So-and-so got elected to be the top of the committee, or so-and-so got a promotion that I should have gotten. There are all kinds of temptations around us in our world that hit us when we're vulnerable, when we're paying more attention to ourselves than we are to how we are actually portraying ourselves to the rest of the world. Well, the fruits of the Spirit are amazingly oriented towards other people. It's only when we can get out of our little box of me, that we can focus on what the Holy Spirit wants us to be able to do. To live in an attitude of love, joy, peace, and yes, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. These aren't easy things to do. I'm sorry, oh, there's Sandy, she's here. Sandy told me the last time I talked about a grocery store story that she was going to pray for me because I seem to have problems in the grocery store. Sandy, keep praying. Because yesterday, I had a problem in the grocery store. I stopped just to get a few things. I had 7 items in my basket, and I got in the 10-item express line. 2 people ahead of me was a couple who had a basket full of things. The young man who was the cashier was having difficulty communicating with them. So I think part of the problem have been that they just couldn't read the sign. They had a stack of items, the same items about this big. And I couldn't tell if it was pasta, they were in plastic bags, I couldn't tell what the item was. But the cashier kept going back and forth, trying to explain to the people how much it cost. I couldn't hear all the conversation. But the young man in front of me, who had 4 items in his basket, turned to me and said, "Well, so much for the express lane." And I said, "This happens to me all the time." And I shared with him, I said, "I'm a pastor of a church." I said, "I'm going to be preaching about the fruits of the Spirit on Sunday, and my patience is really being tried right now." Fortunately, God enabled me to have a funny conversation with this young man. Prayer was answered. Instead of getting angry about it, or even complaining that these people, had taken up the wrong lane, when the man in front of me got to the cashier, he said, "Did you notice that those people had more than 10 items?" And he said it so kindly. I like to think that because of my conversation with him, I deflated some of his anger as well. And the cashier said, "Well, sometimes when people get here and I see that they have more than 10 items, it will actually take longer to have them pack their items back into their cart and go into another lane. And so it's just as easy to go ahead and take care of them then." God answered my prayer because I wasn't the person immediately behind him. Another person there for me to have this dialogue and to remind me that there are other people in the world besides me, as my dad and grandfather taught me so well, and that what I do not only reflects me, but it reflects who I represent. If I call myself a Christian, then these tiny little irritating episodes in our lives can so easily turn into something else that they don't need to become. Imagine if this person, and since I was at a grocery store in Munster, Indiana, which is right over the state line from where I live, I often, as I've told you many times, run into people from Salem in particular who have seen me on TV. Imagine if I had been really surly and nasty and really given that cashier a piece of my mind. And someone behind me says, "Pastor Terry." Imagine if you have your own grocery store moment in the Downers Grove Jewel or Naperville or Westmont or wherever you live, and someone comes behind you and says, Sandy Allen, is that you?" And Sandy's on her way to church. We never know how these actions will play out to the rest of the world. The hard thing is that we are human. And just by being Christian, it doesn't mean that we are perfect or that we are flawless or that we always say or do the right thing. But Paul's point is that we need help in order to be and do the kinds of things that represent who we are. And we are Christians. We are followers of Jesus Christ. Our church says that we are called to be the presence of Christ in the community. How we reflect Jesus in our words and our actions is so important. And as we learned in our Bible study last winter about the fruits of the Spirit, the Holy Spirit is God's gift. It's what Jesus prayed that the church would receive, not only so that we could feel good, but more importantly, that it would remind us of all the things that he had taught, and it would continue to teach us over time about how to live this life that he's called us to. Focusing on ourselves leads to one set of actions, and realizing that we really need help, we have to develop healthy lifestyles. Just like there's no way around more exercise and less food if you want to lose weight. If you want to be a spiritually mature person who can really exhibit these fruits of the flesh of love, joy, kindness, and patience, you have to feed your spiritual bodies in a healthy way. You have to pay attention to the spiritual disciplines of prayer and worship and studying the text that is so sacred to all of us. We have to practice and live out as this church does so well. It's so nice to have Willie Campbell. I've heard so much about you over the years and pads. But we do these things. There are lots of people who help with shelters, and there are lots of people who give money to good causes, and there are lots of people who volunteer at social service agencies. But as Christians, we do it not just because it's a good thing to do, but we do it because we are living out a call to be a certain way in the world, to represent Jesus Christ. We do it because Jesus calls us to live and be a certain way in the world. It is not easy to lay aside things like envy and jealousy and anger. You can probably get your sexual life together, I think. But there are some people who struggle even with that. And we have to remember that the things that we struggle with day to day are things that we literally have to lay at the foot of the cross and ask God to heal and ask God to remove even certain desires from us, to ask God to help us to be more patient, to be more loving, to exhibit more joy. Alice and I joked and we prayed last week for patience. You all know what I'm talking about. There's probably not a person in this room that doesn't struggle with patience or the ability to have self-control or the ability to even feel and allow yourself to express joy when times are difficult. It's not an easy thing to do on our own, but it's an easier thing to do when we allow the Holy Spirit to feed us, to help us, and to guide us when these day-to-day struggles become sometimes more than we can bear. We've all had our moment when we've had to deliver strong feedback, as I would say, to someone who's provided poor customer service, or Wednesday night Carol sliced open watermelon and it was bad inside and she had to take it back. And I almost wish I could have gone with her just to see how she handled that interaction with the store. We've all had those kinds of interactions. Paul reminds us that there's a way to do them that's enabled by the Holy Spirit that allows us to be examples of how Christ wants us to live. I know that I'm going to need continued prayers for the grocery store, or the gas station, or the drive-thru and my order is wrong, or when someone cuts into me on the expressway. Or my favorite thing that also happened this week was 3 students walking down the sidewalk, 3 abreast, who made no attempt whatsoever to move so that one person could pass by. Sometimes you wonder, didn't your mom tell you to think about other people as you're walking down the street? And I held my tongue because I wanted to say, it's impolite to walk through your breast down a street and have someone have to go around you. People in our world don't think about other people. They really don't. And as Christians, we can either get angry, we can lash out, or we can remember what Paul said. That the fruit of the Spirit, the sign that God is with us, is that we're able to show patience, love, and self-control. I'm going to be praying for me. I'm going to be praying for all of us as we seek to live in this world in a way that says to the rest of the world, that Jesus thing must really be real. Because look how kind and patient and loving this person is in this hectic situation. Did you see that person pull in front of her in the grocery line? She didn't even respond. She just smiled and said, feel free. I need your prayers, church. I need your prayers. But God calls us to live in a better way, in a higher way. We can't do it on our own. It's the fruit of the Spirit in us that allows us to be who He's called us to be. Good luck, and I'm going to pray.